welcome to this week's edition of Think Big. I am your host, Akia Garnett, and I am so excited to be back in the studio. We were on break for just a little while and took some time to freshen up some things. And so this is the first episode of our new fall season, and I'm so pleased that I get to be joined by Jim Bender, and he's the principal of ZK Development Solutions. They are a federal and nonprofit business development firm. And he's going to be talking all about how to win more work with the federal government. And this is also applicable to other types of organizations that you may be bidding on projects for. And we're also going to talk about ways that you can develop a strong and solid pipeline so that you're not in a space of scrambling to find new projects when you might be already doing pretty well in your business. So without further ado, I would love to introduce to some and reacquaint with others. Jim Bender, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So please tell us about your firm.
So I founded this firm in 2013 to help small and medium-sized business owners do better in the federal and nonprofit funding sectors. And I do this by helping them sharpen up their strategy, improve their processes, which leads to more funding.
Right. So that's really fun for me. I just think that business development, when you have a solid process, can be fun. You know, it's not just labor intensive, although you're out there looking for work. But if you have a solid process in place, you know, then you can really do great things through that and continue to enhance it over time. What led you to create the organization?
Well, yeah, and solid process is important, and hard work is important too. Mm-hmm. I found that a lot of small business owners are really focused on keeping their business running. They're executing their projects, they're managing their people, they're setting the vision, they're doing all of the things a business owner has to do, and it means they don't have a lot of time to really think through their business development strategy, and they may not know the best way to crack the federal market. They need some help in setting priorities, identifying the best targets, and getting a good process down so they're not wasting their time going after stuff that's not competitive.
Right. Jim, how long have you been in this line of work?
I've been working in the federal contracting space since 1997. And as I said, I started this business in 2013. Mm-hmm. I've worked at large consulting firms, nonprofit organizations at an executive level, and for-profit publicly traded firms.
You know, so it's all about relationships, right? And pipelines and processes. How else would you summarize it?
The business development process? Mm-hmm. Well, it's really about knowing yourself. So many times when I meet with a business owner, I ask them, so what makes you unique? Why are you different from all of your competitors? And they struggle to find an answer to that. And that's really the key to getting started with good development. You have to know what makes you stand out, whether it's the services you provide, the way you provide it, your connections, your agency experience, your low price,
right.
Whatever it is, you need to know what makes you different, how to articulate it clearly, and who's going to buy those services.
Right, and let's just talk about what that business development process is. You know, what that might look like, and it differs for every organization. Every organization is different in terms of the way that they pursue work, but there are some general concepts that are a part of every process, and that goes, you know, back to actually knowing, you know, what your core competencies are so that when you find a proposal, it's easy for you to just kind of slide that in. But then actually knowing where to find requests for proposals,
right,
or requests for quotations or requests for information. Let's talk a little bit about how you might help businesses start out that process so that they can uncover opportunities to bid.
Right, and that's exactly what it is. So once you know what you're about and what you have to sell, you have to match that, of course, with buyers.
Right.
Who are the people that are interested in what you do and in the way you do it? How do they buy their services? Most work will go through a mechanism, so that means that if you want to get access to the work, you have to do some pre-clearance work. It could be the GSA schedule. Mm-hmm. It could be an indefinite quantity contract. It could be that their business is set aside for a disadvantaged category or an 8A firm.
Right.
So you need to be aware of how they're buying the services and position yourself to be ready that when the opportunity comes up, you have a way to access them.
Right. And then, the olden days, you could pick up the phone or flip through your Rolodex, and now, you're pre-populating a database with your core competencies and your NAICS codes and all of those things so that when you actually do get an opportunity, you're already set up as a vendor in their database.
Exactly.
How different is that from what you might recall from, a decade ago?
Well, it certainly is a lot more competitive. In the old days when I started out, there was a lot more big, long contracts. So you win 1-5 contract, it supports a dozen or 20 or 30 people, and you're good until that comes up for recompete. Now the government has a tendency to break it up into smaller pieces called task orders, and it just means a lot more work to keep a bunch of people busy.
Right. So you uncover these opportunities out there, and there are different portals like Fed BizOps and various websites, and then there are some private firms that might also go out and do some searching so that you don't have to spend a lot of time and money looking for those opportunities. But you've got these requests for proposals in front of you. What's the first thing you think a small business owner should do?
Well, they should be ready before the proposal gets there, because once the proposal gets there, it's almost too late.
Right.
So using those databases like FedBizOps, like the proprietary ones like GovWin and EasyGovOps and those sorts of things, you can find out pretty easily when these things are coming up for recompetition. And the government is nothing if it's not predictable.
Right.
So if it's a 3-year contract that's in its third year now, you can expect to come up for recompete in the next 6 to 9 months. And you can start with the previous RFP, which can be accessed, and say, well, they're going to start with this and change it based on whatever's happened in the last 3 years. So it's really important to know what's coming, to know what the competition is, to have a sense of what the agency is really going to be looking for and matching yourselves to that. So when the RFP hits, you already have a good idea of whether you even want to spend time looking hard at it.
You've heard people, talk about helping to write an actual scope of work so that by the time the opportunity hits the street, it's somewhat tailored to your core competencies. Now, that's not something that could be broadcasted, if you will, but sometimes you are invited on the pre-RFP phase to participate in a scope of work or solutions finding discussion. Have you seen that?
Well, certainly. And there's a real myth out there that you can't talk to government people about work that's coming up. Before the RFP is released, then there's executive memos that lay this out. Before the RFP is released, you can have all the conversations you want with the government procurement people, because they need to hear from industry about what are the latest solutions, what are the latest technologies, which you may know more about than they do. And this is your opportunity to get in there and to talk to them about what you do and how you do it, so that they can align their requirements to your service delivery, or what you can deliver for them.
Right.
So it's called shaping, and it's certainly something that you want to work on if you have the opportunity and you have access to the client.
Right. And how does this differ in your mind from the nonprofit sector? It's a lot looser, of course. But what have you seen? How do you help people understand the differences?
Between nonprofit funding and government funding?
Nonprofit procurement and the process.
Yeah, so the government procurement process is very rigid. It's very clearly defined in regulations there is not a lot of flexibility in it, and it tends to be a little bit more bureaucratic. In the nonprofit sector, they can be a lot more flexible with it. They have to ensure fair competition ultimately, but they can do it in a different way, and they're a lot more willing to talk with you ahead of time and co-create a solution. Now, if you're going for foundation funding, they're totally into this. They want to have years of conversations with you before they'll cut you a check. Mm-hmm. And it can be a little aggravating because they'll want to have endless conversations about it. But once the proposal comes out, it can be almost a formality.
Right. I mean, you and I in the past have talked about sales cycles
Yeah.
and how long they can be, and they certainly can be a deterrent for some small businesses. How do you respond to that question when it comes up?
That's a really good question. And sometimes the answer to it is the clearest reason why somebody shouldn't get involved with federal government work. Because if you are interested in getting rich quick, you don't want to do it through federal work. It takes a long time to establish a reputation in an agency. And a lot of times you have to get on a mechanism, which means it takes time to even get access to the work. And then once you get access to the work, you have to start small, convince them that you deliver good services, and eventually they'll expand your opportunities there and you'll be able to go bigger. This can take years. But it can be worth the investment over the long run, because while there's a long ramp up, if you maintain good service delivery and you maintain your reputation, it's a steady income stream that can complement some of the other more, say, mercurial income streams,
Right.
revenue streams that might be in your portfolio.
Right, and you might see sometimes a 9-month process, a year process. Some say 2 years to actually land a contract, and so that is a long time to put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to business development. And so it's important for small business owners to understand that they really need to try to diversify their portfolio and business development activities early on so that they don't find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, all the eggs in one basket I would not recommend. You have to be, if you're starting up with this, have something else to keep you going until it really catches on.
Right.
But it can catch on, and it can be very sustainable if you just maintain your delivery levels.
Right, and that's different from the nonprofit world, right, where you might get a contract overnight. I mean, depending upon your ability to fulfill a unique need or relationships that you may have, and so you can kind of cut through a lot of the red tape depending upon the organizational structure.
And there can be changes in the nonprofit world that are very sudden and unexpected. If funder just decides, oh, got a new priority, we're moving over here. The government tends to do that more slowly, even in times like these. The administration may talk about huge budget cuts, but it takes a long time for those to get worked out and they get moderated. So things change slowly in the federal space.
Right. Everybody wants to be a prime contractor. Everybody wants to be prime, but there are so many opportunities in tier 2 or subcontracting. How do you help small business owners approach that conversation when they want their names on the dotted line?
Yeah, and that's really it, isn't it? Especially when you're new to the federal contracting field, it can be really hard to be a prime contractor unless you have something really special or you have a connection to the agency that they want to go to. You really have to establish visibility there and a track record before they're going to let you be a prime contractor. And that comes down to your research again. So when you're looking at the opportunities, you're looking at the other contractors that have won work in there, and you're reaching out to them and you're learning about them and what their service offering is and how you might complement them. So the next time something comes up, maybe the work that you're after, you can get a piece of that because they don't do what you do especially well, and you can augment their capabilities. So there's huge opportunities for that, especially if you can partner with someone who has a disadvantaged status or an 8A status.
Right. Is there any particular area of procurement that you really specialize in when it comes to government?
Any particular area of procurement? I help people win them all.
Win them all. Great.
Win them all.
So pricing, that's another challenge, actually building a budget that is satisfactory to federal government. And every budget looks different, of course. How do you help small business owners approach that, especially if they've been doing work with nonprofit that might not have such strict line items, especially for things like G&A and all of those things that could really lump a lot of costs onto the actual service.
Well, there are so many issues around pricing that we could talk about. I think that people have to really do their due diligence to understand how a job has to be priced in a federal contract in order to be winning.
Right.
And I've worked with successful firms that have made a lot of money in, say, the medical field, and they have margins which are much higher for those clients. The government margins they find are lower. There's a way to make money off of those, but it takes a different way of pricing the labor and a different way of managing the work to make sure that you can do the work and still make money off of it. So there's that to think about, but then there's also the administrative rules, which you were hinting at, which are also pretty onerous for the federal government. When you're starting out, you can get away without following all the rules because you're small and because you can use certain contracting mechanisms that let you do, say, a fixed price agreement.
Right.
So you don't have to report out all your indirects and all of this kind of stuff and establish an indirect rate. But eventually you're going to need some expertise to help you establish the right pricing structure and the right labor rates and get an indirect cost agreement and all that stuff. And that requires specialized help.
Right.
It's not something that you can just read the Federal Contracting for Dummies and do it in a way that is going to be good for your business and keep you out of trouble.
Right. Thanks for that. We'll be right back with more of Think Big. You're watching Think Big. I'm your host, Akia Garnett. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hey, Jim. All right, so how do we factor in this whole concept about probability?
Yeah.
Being able to put something in place that says, I'm factoring in the potential to win this opportunity, but I'm also cautiously optimistic.
Yes. The challenge is you have to be fearless and honest with yourself when you think about your chances of winning an opportunity, because it's never really as good as we think. And we believe in our company, we believe in our capabilities, we believe in our solution. We say, why won't the government buy this? It seems obvious to me. Well, it may not be obvious to them if you can't articulate it well, or if a competitor has come up with a better solution. So we always have to start out with putting aside our optimism and being realistic. We have to think about, okay, let's look at every section. What do they want in the technical section? What do they want in a staffing section, a similar experience section? What are each one of the qualifications they're going to look for that's written into the RFP? And what are the other aspects of this that we know from our research? And then once we have that lined up with the rows, then we have the columns, which is you and the 3 or 4 other firms that you know you're going to be bidding on. And if you've done your due diligence on the firms and on the agency, you should be able to answer your question, where are we strong and where are we less strong? And answer the same questions about your competitors and come up with a realistic estimate of what my probabilities are of winning this and how can I improve this. And the time to do this is not when the RFP drops. The time to do this is well in advance when you're beginning to consider this response so that you can do your preparation plan. How do we do research to learn more about the agency and more about their requirements? Who do we need to meet with to learn to get more intelligence about what they might really be looking for? What are the changing agency priorities that are going to manifest themselves in the way they read your proposal? And it takes a lot of work with the databases. It takes a lot of work with networking, making sure you're meeting the people to get that information that may not be written down anywhere to make that rational decision.
Right. I mean, and speaking of the different sections of the proposal, how much weight do you put on that actual staffing section, the bios section? Because some people can just, copy and paste, and they're throwing in bios. We're going to put this person on the team. We're going to put that person on the team. Do you think it really matters?
Yes. Yeah, it does matter. How much weight do I put on it? I put as much weight on it as the government says. So they're going to divide up the 100% of the 100 points that they're going to award, and they're going to put 30 here, 40 here, and 20 here. And that's the way I follow it. But it as much as the temptation is to just this winning proposal over here, let's take this and we can just change the name of the agency and change a few things around here, and it'll be a great proposal for this. But to really write a quality response, you have to start with as much of a blank page as you can to really dive deep into the RFP and into the research that you have and really come up with a specific solution for this that really resonates with what you know is important to the agency, resonates with your win themes, and puts your best foot forward.
Right. I mean, you might see some people might be disappointed feeling like their win ratio is so low, but sometimes that's because they are approaching it as a cookie cutter sort of solution versus, what you just said, which is it's a unique opportunity and each one deserves a unique response.
And doing your legwork ahead of time and not waiting until the RFP drops and say, wow, I could do this. I can write this up and I'll stay up 3 nights doing this or 3 weeks doing this. That's not the way to put your best foot forward. It's important to have somebody committed to this, whether it's a consultant or a staff member that's looking for these opportunities well in advance, putting them in a pipeline, doing a little bit of research, putting them in a nice chart for you so you can qualify whether they're a number 1, number 2, or number 3 priority, getting some more information on it, and making hard decisions about where you're going to focus your resources. Because no company has endless resources for doing development.
Right. I mean, and so we get through the submission of proposal phase, and now there's the waiting phase. And, sometimes there is a hard do not, contact the procurement officials while an actual bid process is actually it's in process. Mm-hmm. What can small businesses be doing in the interim between submitting that proposal and actually receiving you've been down selected and a part of the next decision making process for this opportunity?
Well, not much. Mm-hmm. Really, it's about waiting because mm-hmm. you don't want to run the risk of a procurement irregularity, which will lead to a protest. But I would say if you're expecting to be down selected and there's best and finals, and that's very often the case, you could try to look ahead to what they might ask. But the best strategy is to move on to the next one. The next one that's in your pipeline, get ready for that one, do the research for that one. And then when the best and finals hits, then you deal with those questions as they come up and you get prepared for that.
How much of a challenge do you see small businesses going through when they're trying to decide which opportunities to pursue in the first place, considering, as you said, no business has endless resources.
Right.
So you've got to be really strategic.
Right.
What have you seen?
Yeah, and it's important to focus, because this kind of research that you need to do on your agency and their priorities, you can't do that for EPA, Fish and Wildlife, CDC. You have to know where your best opportunities are and really focus your energy on that, and resist the urge to say, oh man, I just saw this thing that popped on Fed BizOps. I think it'd be great for us. Well, you're going to put a lot of energy into that, and it's a 10% probability, and you might just want to save your energy for the next one that pops up that you've been prepared for and is really aligned to your sweet spot.
Right. I mean, and this can go in the opposite direction too. When you've got, that agency, or you have that nonprofit organization or someone saying, I've got the perfect opportunity for you. In your mind, as a small business owner, you know that this is not directly aligned with your mission and your core competencies, but it's a win.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to do some work.
Yeah.
How do you help small business owners really sort of right size every opportunity and say no?
And winning one of those may be the worst thing that can happen to you, because yes, it's more revenue, and maybe it's even profitable, but it distracts the ownership from focusing on what they're really good at. And that's where it comes back to working with somebody to define your unique selling proposition, to define where you're going to sell that, and sticking with that strategy over the long term. I know. I've been in that seat. I've been the owner. I've been the leader of the company that says, boy, this is a good chunk of money, and it's not exactly what we do, but we can figure it out. Well, instead of figuring out something that you're not great at, why not wait for the opportunity for something you are great at, where you can shine, where your staff feel good about doing the work and feel good about coming to work in the morning, instead of just feeling like they have a job that they're coming into that just pays them.
Right. I mean, and from a branding perspective, what this looks like is you've got these dissimilar projects and you're trying to string it all together into a story. And you can see, when you look on some websites, they'll have, there's a nice solid list of work they've done in all of these. But this kind of thing is, sort of out there. What is that, and how is that related to your brand? And sometimes that's because they accepted a contract that did not really resonate with their mission and core competencies, but it was a win.
Yeah. And in the real world, do you do that sometimes? Sure you do. But it should be a real exception to the rule. And maybe it'll be interesting for a lark to try something new, but really you need to know what you're about and stick with that. And if you're having a hard time finding the opportunities, find somebody that can help you dig them up and go through the databases and identify other opportunities that you can be tracking and getting ready for.
All right, Jim, and you're one of those people that they can find.
Oh, sure.
And you can work with them. How do you meet your clients?
Well, generally the way I work with them is talking to them about what's important to their company, what their goals are, what do they want to do in the future in the federal marketplace, and really narrow down to some high priorities of where we want to look for business. Then I'll go into the databases and pick some target agencies and do analysis of what their spend has been over the last 5 years according to their NAICS codes. The NAICS codes being the classification for the services they deliver. So we look at how much money they've spent over the last 5 years in those NAICS codes, how they've come out, through what kind of mechanisms, through whether they're set-asides or whether they're free and open competition for large and small businesses, and see how that aligns with how the company is set up. So if they're dead set, I was working with a company that really wanted to focus on the National Institutes of Health. And I said, okay, let's analyze how they buy their stuff. And we found out they buy about 70% of their services through this GSA mechanism. I said, you want to work with NIH, you got to get on this mechanism. It's going to take you a year, it's going to cost some money, but you are well aligned to sell them services. They want the kind of thinking you have, and this is worth the investment to do.
Wow. And when you're working with small business owners and you are working through that entire process that you just mentioned, where are you getting stopped along the way, or do you find how do you deal with the roadblocks?
The roadblocks like
needing information, not having resources, them running out of resources, all sorts of things that could happen. I mean, especially with an RFP process, it can take a while to sometimes write these things.
Yes. The good news is there's a lot of information out there that is just there for the having if you know where to look for it and you know how to use these databases to extract them. You mine your trade publications that are relevant to your field for information about the agency or competitors. You mine your competitors' websites. You go to meetings to listen to what people are talking about. You get on the meeting agendas. You troll the internet and the social media pages to find out. There are a lot of federal government buyers who are very active on LinkedIn and Twitter and other social media, and you can find a lot about what they're thinking by going and following them and seeing what they're talking about. So the information is out there that can help you focus your thinking and help you figure out how you want to spend your money in terms of the face-to-face outreach, because like any other marketing, there's nothing better than a face-to-face meeting and being ready for that.
Right. You think that some businesses are overlooking the whole social media component when it comes to federal?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because it seems, so especially with LinkedIn, it being somewhat of a sterile environment, people might not be thinking that this is where procurement officers are really going to talk about opportunities.
Well, they're listening, and some of them are talking. So if you have a presence there and you are a thought leader in whatever field you're in, they're going to see you there. And then when the phone rings, I mean, it's the hardest thing in the world for you to get through to a Fed on a cold call. But if they've seen your LinkedIn post last week, they're much more likely to pick up the phone and have something to talk to you about. Certainly a good strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
Stay right there. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk about cold calling. You're watching Think Big. I'm your host, Akia Garnett, and I'm joined by Jim Bender, and we're talking about all things federal government procurement. You know, Jim, they say all meat ain't good meat. That's what I've always heard, and I subscribe to that. Can you add to it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes there's maybe business you don't want to win. So if you've done your analysis and you know how to price the thing, especially in the day of what's called LPTA, low price technically acceptable, which means if you are just the minimally qualified but you have the lowest price, you win. Well, what do you win? You win the opportunity to have a very low margin contract and do mediocre work because that's all they have money to pay for. You can question whether you want to do that, and some firms may choose to do that, but if you're losing money on it, what's the point? And you need to know when to cut bait. Yes, you've been chasing this forever, but if I have to price it this low to get the work and I'm going to lose money, you better have a really good reason for doing that. Especially if it's funded so low, you can't do your excellent work. The way you win more business with the federal government is you do excellent work and more people want to give you work. There is good marketing, there's writing zingy proposals, there's the flashy stuff, but ultimately you have to be able to deliver and deliver excellent to build a good reputation that's going to get you more business.
Right.
And you got to be careful taking business that doesn't allow you to do that.
Right. As they say, nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
unless you're going in with a brand, that's unstoppable, they're taking a chance on you.
Well, I've knocked off some of those unstoppable brands in my history because you can find their weakness and you can make. And I had this job I was doing with an agency I was working a while ago for, where we knew that this top line firm was vulnerable because they had problems on delivery.
Right.
They would write great proposals, they had great relationships, but sometimes they would just get people really angry with the way they do their work. We reached out to the client for a particular contract months in advance of a known recompete. We listened to her to find out what her needs were, what her frustrations were with the incumbent, and we positioned ourselves with a partner to knock them off. And they were very surprised.
Right. You're never too big to fail.
Never too big to fail. That's exactly it.
Cold calling. Everybody I've ever met hates it. But it's not as hard when you have a script and you
Right.
actually want to connect with people. What can you add to that?
Yeah. Well, you have to want to connect with people because
Right.
if you don't want to connect with people, you're not going to get the really critical information you need and the relationships you need to be successful. So starting with your unique selling proposition, you better have a 30-second or less elevator speech that is compelling and makes people want to know more. You don't need to tell the story of your whole company, of all your capabilities and why you're awesome and this $50 million contract. You don't need to say all of that. You just need to tell them enough so that they want to know more from you.
Right.
And that's it.
And that follow-up is so critical,
And
right?
the follow-up is critical.
Right. And then, finally, you get someone who will give you a second call and perhaps a face-to-face meeting for coffee or whatever. What do you take with you?
Your ears. A lot of times we think that these meetings, especially a coffee meeting, is about, let's pull out the PowerPoint and here are my brochures and here are the great things that I do. And you got the meeting. Chances are the best thing you can do is listen. Have some questions ready to ask about what's important to the agency right now. What's important to you? What do you look for in a contractor? What are the big challenges you have? What keeps you up at night? Look for problems that you can solve. The more you can listen and the more you can understand what goes on inside of the head of that Fed or whoever you're talking to, the better positioned you are to relate to that in your response or your proposal or whatever you're going to say next. And wait for them to ask, well, what do you do? And that's where you can pull out the PowerPoint and give them the 10-minute speech about what you do, an overview of the capabilities. But really the most important part of those meetings is listening and developing a relationship and getting information about what's important to them.
Right. I mean, and they're real people at the end of the day. I mean,
are.
they're procurement processes, but people are behind the decision making, and they're looking for opportunities to get to know you as a person
Yes.
versus just your brand or just the solution that you're providing. How do you help people balance that out by, letting some of that personality show while they are presenting their core competencies for the company?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance because people buy from people. People they trust the owner of the company or their project manager to deliver, and they usually like them. Not always, but usually like them.
Yeah.
But you don't want to waste their time with a lot of small talk.
Right.
So, the other day I was a meeting with somebody who I knew was Puerto Rican. So I said, have you heard from your family after the hurricane?
Right.
And she was really grateful for me just recognizing that and asking the question. But after she answered the question, I said my sympathetic words, and we moved on to the business at hand.
Right.
So connecting to them as a person is important, but there has to be a balance as well.
Right. And nowadays it's, I've got 15 minutes for, a chat with you. Or I've got 20 minutes for a chat with you. So you want to really maximize that time.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about just kind of, making sure that you may acknowledge things, especially those things that might be obvious, and then moving right on to business. So what I'm taking away from this conversation are a few steps in the business development process as a whole. And that's number one, making sure that you first have all of your unique identifiers or your core competencies aligned so that when opportunities do present themselves, that you are ready with some sort of boilerplate that you can customize. And then looking at opportunities that are introduced into the marketplace, and there are several tools out there. Jim, you mentioned some earlier. You can mention them again. Then next, looking at the actual opportunities themselves when they hit the street and being ready. Then submitting that proposal, waiting it out, and then looking for new opportunities while you're being patient and
Moving
waiting,
on,
right, and moving on.
Moving.
What else can you add to that?
Boy, make sure you have a strategy, a thoughtful strategy, and don't be afraid to stick with it. Yes, you'll have to make adjustments when the market changes or when you change, but it's important to have a strategy. Get your qualifications out there. Get a messaging strategy about how you're going to communicate it, and stick with it over the long term. Because it's just like starting up a business, and the people on this know how to start up a business. You don't become profitable overnight.
Right.
There's a period of hard work and waiting for the business to come. And it's the same thing with federal work. It takes a long time to do what you need to do, but if you stick with it and you have a good strategy, you'll get there.
Yeah, one thing I do remember from an earlier conversation with you, which I really like, is that federal work is not for every small business.
No, it's not.
And recognizing that early on can save you a lot of heartache and grief and money. How do you help small business owners realize whether or not that is the way that they should go in the first place?
And it does take some conversations. It takes some conversations about your overall business priorities and how this will fit in. It's not going to be a panacea for you, but it could fit in. How does your federal business support your other business opportunities? So is it good for your commercial work to say that you've worked with this federal agency? There's a good reason for making the investment. Look at the pricing, the way it has to be priced. Look at the labor rates that are published, and you can see how labor is charged. How can you make money off of that? What are some creative ways you can do that? Taking a hard look at the databases and the way the work is coming out, and making sure you have a way to break in there.
Right, and the most important part of it all, and we kind of touched on that earlier, is actually winning.
Yeah, winning.
Winning the work, and
winning
then
is good.
Right, winning is good. I mean, Charlie Sheen kind of made that, a popular term, but yeah, winning is good. But
winning is good.
When you actually win the work, you're actually on the line for delivering great service.
Yeah.
And then waiting to see if that opportunity is going to be rebid. Have you seen small businesses lose that rebid because they just didn't, take it very seriously that they were going to be up for competition again.
Yeah, yes, and no matter how much the project officer loves you, they don't get to decide who wins the recompete. There's an evaluation committee. It's very strictly watched. The contracting officer has no reason to be partial to you, and you have to be ready. You have to understand where your vulnerabilities are and be ready to address them. So I was working on a very successful contract, one of many that we had in this office. It had even reached the point that we were so successful in this office that we were hearing the word on the street was, hey, they're getting too much work. You need to start hiring other contractors.
Sure.
And the agency was under pressure to really look hard at other people because we had all the work.
Right.
One of our key campaigns was up for recompete. And 6 months out, the leadership of my organization took a look at that and said, okay, where are we vulnerable? How is somebody going to beat us? And it was a communication campaign. And we knew that while we delivered good service and we've done a good job, we were vulnerable in new media. That the people we were up against were really brilliant and on the cutting edge of new media because of the other clients they had, and they could beat us that way. So we went out and we found a partner to bring on, a new partner. It was a big ad firm, major national ad firm that wanted to get into more federal work. We brought them on. They came up together with a brilliant strategy for the recompete, and we won.
Excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to leave behind for our audience?
Well, I got my book that's coming out. 10 Steps to Winning More Federal Money for Your Business. Smarter Strategy for Growth. That should be coming out next month. You can find out more about it on my website, zk-development.com.
Great, and you're on social media, I take it?
Social media, Jim B, another B, E-N-D-E-R. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching Think Big. I am your host, Akia Garnett, and I've been joined this week by Jim Bender. What's that URL again, Jim?
zk-development.com.
Find Jim online, contact him if you need help, if you're looking to go in the procurement space in the federal world, or you need support in the nonprofit procurement space, call Jim. He'll help you. We'll see you next time. This episode of Think Big has been hosted by the SOAR Community Network. Find them online, soarcommunitynetwork.com.